It started on what I can only describe as an ordinary day. One of those days that feel so routine you hardly notice them. I had just finished my shift at work and was driving home. The sky was clear, a soft shade of orange fading into purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. There was nothing unusual about it, no strange feelings, no eerie vibes, just normal. When I got home, I made dinner, scrolled through my phone, and binge-watched a show. The kind of night where the world feels so predictable that you stop questioning anything. Around 11 p.m., I finally turned off the TV and headed to bed. That's when things shifted. It began with a noise, a low, vibrating hum that didn't seem to have a source. At first, I thought it was coming from my neighbors or maybe some machinery outside. But as I sat up in bed, I realized it wasn't just a sound. It was inside me, like a faint buzzing in my chest. I got up to look out the window. The street was eerily quiet. No cars, no wind, not even the usual chirping of crickets. That's when I saw it. A soft white light hovered above the trees in the distance. It wasn't like a flashlight or a street lamp. It moved too smoothly, almost as if it were alive. At first I thought it might be a drone, but it grew brighter, spreading out like liquid light. Then came the feeling. My entire body froze like I'd been glued to the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. My breathing felt shallow and my chest tightened with an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as if my brain had been shut off, replaced by this instinctual panic. The light began to grow stronger, and before I could even process what was happening, everything turned white. When the light swallowed me, it felt like reality itself had been erased. There was no sound, no sense of direction, not even the weight of my own body. For a split second, I wondered if I was dead, if this was what people meant when they talked about seeing the light. But I didn't feel peace. I felt terror. Then I started to rise. At first it was subtle, almost like I was floating. But as the sensation grew stronger, I could feel my body being pulled upward, smoothly, silently, with no sense of resistance. I wasn't in control. My arms hung limply at my sides. My legs dangled as if they didn't belong to me anymore. I tried to fight it, to scream or move or do something, but it was like my brain was disconnected from the rest of my body. Even my thoughts felt distant, like I was stuck in a fog. I could barely make sense of what was happening, and that only made the fear worse. As I ascended, the white light began to fade, replaced by a cold metallic glow. I could see the outline of something massive above me, a structure hanging in the sky, impossibly large and eerily silent. It wasn't like any aircraft I'd ever seen. The edges were sharp, almost angular, with panels that seemed to shift and shimmer as I got closer. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. There was this pressure, like being underwater, but I could still breathe, or at least, I think I could. My chest moved, but I couldn't feel the air entering or leaving my lungs. When I reached the bottom of the structure, I was pulled through an opening. It wasn't a door exactly. There were no hinges, no seams. It was just there, like part of the ship had melted away to let me in. Inside, the air was colder, thinner. The walls shimmered with a strange, almost liquid texture, but when I was close enough to touch them, they looked solid, smooth, metallic, and dark, like steel, polished to a mirror finish. There were lights everywhere, but they weren't coming from any visible source. They just seemed to seep out of the walls, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't see them at first, but I could feel them, eyes, dozens of them watching me. It wasn't like being stared at by a person or even an animal. This felt invasive, like they were peeling back layers of me, digging into my thoughts and memories. It was suffocating, and then they stepped into view. There were 3 of them. They were tall, too tall to be human, and impossibly thin. Their skin was a pale bluish gray, almost translucent, and their limbs seemed longer than they should be, like they'd been stretched. Their heads were large and oval-shaped, with no visible mouth or nose, just 2 massive black eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around them. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Those eyes held me in place, locking me into this horrifying, silent connection. It felt like they were searching for something inside me, something I didn't even know I had. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they moved, quick, fluid, like shadows flickering across a wall. I didn't see where they went, but I could still feel their presence, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I tried to scream again, but no sound came out. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was one of them, reaching toward me with a long, spindly hand. Its fingers were thin and sharp, almost claw-like, and as it touched my forehead, a sharp, searing pain shot through my skull. And then, nothing. When I regained consciousness, I wasn't sure if I was awake or dreaming. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was an unnatural absence of sound, like the world had been muted. Even the faint ringing in my ears, the kind you usually notice in total silence, was gone. I was lying on a flat, cold surface. My limbs were stiff, like they'd been frozen in place for hours. When I tried to move, I realized I couldn't. My arms and legs weren't strapped down, but something held them firmly in place, like an invisible force pressing against my skin. The room was dimly lit, though I couldn't see where the light was coming from. The walls were smooth and metallic, reflecting faint glimmers of that strange light. There were no visible seams, no corners, just curved surfaces that seemed to stretch endlessly. As my vision adjusted, I started to notice more details. The ceiling above me was covered in intricate patterns, like veins or circuits, glowing faintly with an otherworldly blue hue. They pulsed rhythmically, almost as if the ship itself was alive. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. To my right, a tall, thin figure stood silently. It wasn't moving, just watching me with those enormous, pitch-black eyes. Its face was expressionless. No mouth, no nose, no features at all, just smooth, pale skin stretched tightly over a skull-like frame. It tilted its head slightly like it was studying me, and I felt that invasive sensation again, like it was peeling back layers of my mind. I wanted to scream, to tell it to stop, but my voice was gone. My throat felt tight, like I hadn't used it in hours or days. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. More of them. 3, maybe 4. They moved with unnatural grace, their long limbs almost floating as they circled me. One of them held an object, a small metallic device with no discernible buttons or features. It hovered in the air, glowing faintly as it emitted a soft humming noise. I didn't know what they were going to do, but the panic in my chest was unbearable. My heart raced, and I could feel the cold sweat dripping down the sides of my face. One of them approached, its hand reaching toward me. Its fingers were impossibly long, ending in sharp, pointed tips that glimmered under the faint blue light. When it touched my skin, it wasn't like being touched by a person. There was no warmth, no texture, just a cold, electric sensation that spread through my body like static. And then, without warning, I felt pain. It wasn't like any pain I'd ever experienced. It wasn't sharp or localized. It was everywhere, deep in my bones, my muscles, my skull. It was like my entire body was being dismantled from the inside out. I couldn't move, couldn't fight back. All I could do was endure it. Images started flashing through my mind, rapid and chaotic. At first, they were memories. My childhood home, my parents, friends I hadn't seen in years. But then they shifted. I saw places I didn't recognize, deserts, cities, forests, but they were all wrong. The skies were a sickly orange, the ground cracked and lifeless. People were running, screaming, their faces twisted in terror. I saw explosions, floods, fire consuming entire towns. And then I saw them, the same creatures standing over me, but there were hundreds of them, descending from the sky like shadows. The images came faster and faster, blending together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. My head felt like it was going to split open, the pain so intense I thought I might die. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, everything stopped. The creatures stepped back, their black eyes still fixed on me. The device they'd been using floated away, disappearing into the darkness. I was left lying there, trembling, My body still paralyzed, but my mind racing with questions. What were they doing to me? What had I just seen? I didn't get any answers. One of them moved closer, placing its hand on my chest. The same cold electric sensation spread through me, and just like that, everything went black again. Did you enjoy the start of this story? Got any thoughts or questions? Drop your comment below. I'd love to hear what you think so far. And if you'd like to support the channel so I can keep bringing stories like this, consider donating any amount. The link is pinned in the first comment. Even the smallest help makes a huge difference. Thank you for being here. When I woke again, I was still inside the ship, but now I was upright. I wasn't standing. Not really. It felt like I was suspended, held in place by something unseen. My arms were spread out to the sides, my legs slightly apart, and I couldn't move an inch. The room was different this time. It was larger, but just as featureless and cold as before. The walls seemed alive, shifting with faint patterns of light that moved like liquid metal. The air was thin, and every breath felt like it wasn't quite enough. In front of me, the figures stood in a line, motionless. Their black eyes bore into me, unblinking. One of them stepped forward, holding a different device. This one was longer, almost like a rod, with an orb at the end that pulsed faintly with blue and white light. When the device activated, I felt it before I saw it. A sharp, piercing sensation ran down my spine, and then it spread outwards, as if my entire nervous system had been lit on fire. My body jerked involuntarily, but whatever was holding me in place kept me locked in position. I could feel them probing me, not physically, but mentally. It was like they were sifting through my memories, pulling out pieces and examining them. Moments from my life flashed in my mind, things I hadn't thought about in years. The time I fell off my bike as a kid, the smell of my grandmother's house, the face of a high school friend I hadn't seen in a decade. They weren't just looking at me, they were dissecting me. One of them stepped closer, holding what looked like a thin, metallic needle. It was impossibly long and shimmered under the faint light of the room. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the needle moved toward my neck. When it pierced my skin, the pain was immediate and intense, but there was something else, something I can't quite describe. It was as if the needle wasn't just entering my body, but my mind as well. I could feel it burrowing deep, not physically but mentally, like it was planting something inside me or pulling something out. I wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but no sound came out. My voice was gone, trapped somewhere deep inside me. The examination continued. They scanned my body with their strange devices, each one producing sensations that were unnatural and alien. One made my skin feel like it was burning, even though there were no visible marks. Another sent waves of vibrations through me, as if every cell in my body was resonating at the same frequency. At one point, I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was pressing down on my heart. My vision blurred, and I thought I might pass out. But the sensation stopped just before I did. It was as if they were testing my limits, seeing how far they could push me without breaking me entirely. And through it all, they didn't say a word. There were no sounds, no gestures, nothing to indicate what they were doing or why. Their black eyes gave nothing away, but I could feel their presence in my mind, cold and calculating. When the examination finally ended, I felt completely drained. My body ached, my head throbbed, and my mind was a foggy mess. Whatever they had done to me, it wasn't over. I could feel it, deep inside me. Something had changed. Before I could process what had happened, one of them stepped forward again. It placed a hand on my forehead, and just like before, a sharp pain shot through my skull. And then once again, everything went dark. When I woke again, I wasn't sure if I was still in the ship or somewhere else entirely. My body felt weightless, like I was floating, but I wasn't moving. I tried to open my eyes, but everything was blurred, as if I were underwater. Then came the images. They weren't like dreams, and they weren't memories either. They were sharper, more vivid, as if they were being broadcast directly into my mind. At first, it was hard to make sense of them. just flashes of light, colors, shapes. But slowly, they began to form coherent pictures. I saw the Earth from above, the familiar blue and green of the planet surrounded by a thin halo of atmosphere. It was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. As I watched, the colors began to shift. The blue of the oceans turned dark and murky, almost black. The green of the forests faded, replaced by browns and grays. It was like the planet was decaying before my eyes. Then the scenes shifted. I was standing in the middle of a massive city, though I didn't recognize it. The skyscrapers were crumbling, their windows shattered, and thick clouds of smoke hung in the air. The streets were flooded with people, running, screaming, pushing each other out of the way. The noise was deafening, but I could feel their fear. It wasn't just panic, it was pure, primal terror. And then I saw why. The sky above the city was filled with ships, not airplanes, not helicopters. Ships like the one I was in, massive and silent, their dark shapes blotting out the sun. Beams of light shot down from the ships, striking the ground and causing explosions that ripped through buildings and streets. The scenes came faster after that, blending into one another like a chaotic slideshow. A small town consumed by fire, the flames reaching higher than the trees. A vast desert where people scavenged for water under a blood-red sky. A coastal city swallowed by rising waves, the ocean reclaiming the land with brutal force. And then, amidst the destruction, I saw them, the beings. They were everywhere, walking among the ruins, their tall, thin forms silhouetted against the flames and smoke. Some of them were carrying devices that emitted a low hum, while others simply stood and watched, their black eyes observing everything with an eerie calm. The images shifted again. This time, I saw myself. I was standing in a field, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. They were looking at me, their faces a mix of hope and fear. I was holding something in my hands, a small glowing object that pulsed with light. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel its importance, as if it held the key to something vital. The images stopped as abruptly as they had started, leaving me gasping for air. My chest heaved, and I could feel my heart pounding as if I had just run a marathon. My head was spinning, and my body was drenched in sweat. I was back in the ship, now, lying on the cold, metallic surface again. The beings were still there, watching me with their unblinking eyes. I could feel their presence in my mind, like they were waiting for something, for me to understand. But I didn't. I didn't understand any of it. The visions felt too real to be dreams, but they couldn't be memories. They were something else entirely, something I didn't have the words to explain. And the worst part was the feeling they left behind, a deep, gnawing dread that wouldn't go away. Whatever I had seen, it wasn't just a warning. It was a glimpse of what was coming. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just a victim. I was part of whatever this was. I lay there, my body still paralyzed and my mind reeling from what I had just seen. I tried to process it all, the destruction, the fear, the strange object in my hands, but it was like trying to hold water in my palms. Every time I thought I had a grasp on it, the details slipped away. And then I felt it again, that invasive presence in my mind. It was subtle at first, like a faint pressure at the back of my skull, but it grew stronger, spreading through me like icy tendrils. I knew it was them. I didn't see them move or hear any sound, but I could feel them, their collective consciousness pressing into mine. It wasn't like hearing a voice exactly. There were no words, no sounds. It was more like impressions, feelings, images. They weren't speaking to me in the way humans communicate, but I understood them all the same. The first thing they showed me was the Earth again, spinning, slowly in the void of space. But this time it wasn't decaying or being destroyed. It was changing. The land masses shifted, oceans receded, and strange structures began to appear on the surface, massive geometric shapes that didn't belong. Then came the impression of time. I don't know how to explain it, but I could feel it stretching and twisting around me. The images weren't linear. They came all at once, overlapping and colliding, like I was being shown the past, present, and future simultaneously. And then I felt their intent. It wasn't like they told me outright, but I understood. They were shaping us, humanity, guiding us. Every war, every disaster, every major event in history, they were all part of something bigger, a plan that had been unfolding for centuries, maybe even longer. I felt a wave of nausea as the realization hit me. They weren't just observing us, they were controlling us. I wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, but I couldn't. The pressure in my mind grew stronger, and suddenly I was being flooded with more images. I saw historical events unfolding, but they weren't the way I remembered them. There were figures in the background, hidden, barely noticeable, but always there. In the shadows of battlefields, in the crowds of revolutions, in the aftermath of catastrophes. They were there, silently pulling the strings, and then, as quickly as the images came, they stopped. The presence in my mind withdrew, leaving an empty, echoing silence behind. My head throbbed, and my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for too long. I realized I could move again, though just barely. My fingers twitched, and I managed to turn my head slightly. The beings were still there, standing motionless, their dark eyes fixed on me. One of them stepped closer, and I felt the pressure in my mind return. This time, though, it was different, less invasive, more focused. They showed me the object. Again, the glowing thing I'd seen in my vision. It was clearer now, and I could feel its importance, though I still didn't understand what it was. It wasn't just an object, it was a key, a tool, something that could either save us or destroy us, depending on how it was used. And then, just as suddenly, they were gone. I didn't see them leave, they just weren't there anymore. The room felt colder without them, and the silence was deafening. I was left alone, trembling, with the weight of everything they had shown me pressing down on my chest. They hadn't spoken a single word, but their message was clear. This wasn't over. Whatever they were doing, whatever their plan was, I was now a part of it. When the light enveloped me again, I thought it was another vision. My senses were still reeling, my body still aching, and I couldn't tell what was real anymore. But this time, it wasn't images of destruction or alien manipulation. It was something else entirely, something violent. I felt myself falling. It was like being ripped out of the ship and dropped into nothingness. The cold air whipped against my skin, and my stomach lurched as if I were plummeting from an impossible height. My body felt weightless, tumbling uncontrollably, but I couldn't scream. My throat was raw, my lungs felt empty, and I was too disoriented to make sense of what was happening. And then, impact. The landing wasn't as hard as I expected. It was like hitting a dense cushion, though the force still left me gasping. When I finally opened my eyes, I realized I was lying on my back, in a field. The grass beneath me was damp with dew, and the night sky stretched above, dark and endless. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the stars. They looked so normal, so familiar, and yet I felt like I didn't belong under them anymore. My body was heavy, sore, like I'd been through some kind of physical trauma. Every muscle ached and my skin tingled with an almost electric sensation. Slowly, I sat up. The field around me was empty, stretching out into the darkness. In the distance, I could see the faint outline of trees, their tops swaying gently in the wind. There was no sign of the ship, no glowing lights in the sky, just silence. I looked down at myself, half expecting to see blood or burns or something, to explain the pain coursing through my body. That's when I noticed them, marks on my arms and legs. They weren't cuts or bruises, but something else entirely. Thin, precise lines crisscrossed my skin, faintly glowing in the moonlight. They looked almost surgical, like incisions that had already healed, but they didn't hurt when I touched them. I ran my fingers over one of the marks on my forearm, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a scar, It felt like something was beneath the skin, hard and metallic. My stomach turned as I pressed down slightly, feeling the small, solid shape embedded inside me. A wave of nausea hit me, and I doubled over, clutching my stomach. I didn't know what they had done to me, but it was clear that I wasn't the same. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me. The field was eerily quiet, with no sound of animals or insects. Even the wind felt unnatural, too soft, too cold. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd been taken. I started walking, my feet crunching softly against the grass. My head was spinning, and every step felt heavier than the last, but I needed to move. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could tell me where I was, or what had happened to me. After what felt like hours, I finally saw lights in the distance. A house, maybe? A small building? It was hard to tell, but it was the first sign of life I'd seen since I woke up. I stumbled toward it, my body screaming in protest with every step. When I got closer, I realized it was a small farmhouse. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of movement inside. I banged on the door, desperate for help, but no one answered. That's when I saw my reflection in the glass. At first, I didn't recognize myself. My face was pale, my eyes bloodshot, and my hair was matted with sweat and dirt. But it wasn't just that. I looked different. My pupils were larger than they should have been, and there was a faint glow to my skin, almost like the marks on my arms. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Whatever had happened to me, whatever they had done, it wasn't over. They hadn't just taken me, they had changed me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at my reflection in the farmhouse window. My own face didn't feel like mine anymore. The glow in my skin wasn't bright, but it was unmistakable, almost like a faint bioluminescence. It pulsed, in time with my heartbeat, like a signal I couldn't control. I tried to steady my breathing, to convince myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe it was just the shock, I thought. Maybe it was the adrenaline messing with my head. But no amount of rationalizing could explain the marks on my arms or the alien weight I felt under my skin. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still no answer. The farmhouse was completely silent, almost unnaturally so. Even standing on the porch, I couldn't hear a single sound. No creaking of the wood under my feet, no hum of electricity from inside. It was like the place had been vacuum sealed, disconnected from the world. I stepped back, glancing around. The property. There was a barn a few yards away, its roof sagging slightly in the middle. A rusted truck sat in the driveway, its tires flat and its windshield cracked. Everything about the scene felt abandoned, but that didn't make sense. The lights I'd seen from the field, they had to come from somewhere. Someone had to have been here, right? I walked toward the barn, my legs still unsteady. The silence followed me, pressing down on me like a weight. I didn't realize how much I relied on the little background noises of life until they were gone. The absence was suffocating, unnatural. When I reached the barn, I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness inside. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to leave this place and keep walking until I found something familiar. But something else, a curiosity maybe, or desperation, pushed me forward. I pulled the door open, wincing as the rusted hinges creaked. The sound felt deafening in the oppressive silence, and I froze, waiting for, I don't know, something. But nothing happened. Inside, the barn was empty. No animals, no tools, not even the smell of hay. Just bare wooden beams and a dirt floor. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of life. That's when I noticed the symbols. They were carved into the wooden walls, faint but deliberate. At first I thought they were just random scratches, the kind of marks you might see in an old, weathered building. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't random at all. The symbols were geometric, intricate, and eerily familiar. They reminded me of the patterns I'd seen on the ceiling of the ship, the ones that pulsed with light. These carvings didn't glow, but they gave off the same unsettling energy, like they didn't belong in this world. My stomach churned as I ran my fingers over one of the carvings. The wood was cold, almost unnaturally so, and I pulled my hand back instinctively. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a noise exactly. It was more like a vibration, a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could feel it in my chest, in my teeth, in the back of my skull. It was the same hum I'd heard the night I was taken. My vision blurred for a moment, and I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the barn door to steady myself. The hum grew, louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the barn. It was coming from me. The marks on my arms began to glow brighter, pulsing in time with the hum. The sensation under my skin, the hard, metallic objects, grew warmer, almost uncomfortably so. I clutched my arms, trying to stop whatever was happening, but it was useless. I staggered out of the barn, my head spinning. The farmhouse, the barn, the truck, everything around me seemed to blur and distort, like I was looking at it through rippling water. The hum was inside me, consuming me, and I could feel something else. Something watching. I looked up at the sky and my heart dropped. There in the distance was a faint light. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to send a chill through me. It hovered silently above the treetops, just like the light I'd seen before. They hadn't left. I don't know how long I stared at that light. Time felt slippery, like it didn't exist anymore. My body was frozen, rooted to the spot, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I go? There was no escaping them. I knew that now. Just as the panic began to take hold, the light faded. It didn't move or vanish, it simply blinked out, as if it had never been there. The oppressive silence remained, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. My legs finally obeyed, and I stumbled back toward the road. I didn't care where it led or how far I had to walk. I just needed to put distance between myself and whatever had just happened. My mind raced, replaying the events of the past few hours, but none of it made sense. The ship, the visions, the marks on my body. It was too much, too impossible. The road stretched on endlessly, flanked by dense trees that seemed to press in on either side. I kept my head down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. My muscles ached, and my skin felt like it was buzzing, but I forced myself to keep moving. That's when I saw the headlights. At first I thought I was imagining them. The soft glow cut through the darkness, bouncing slightly as the vehicle approached. I stood in the middle of the road, unsure whether to wave it down or hide. But my exhaustion won out, and I raised my arms, waving desperately as the car slowed. It stopped a few feet away, the engine rumbling softly. The driver's side window rolled down, and a man leaned out, his face illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard. He looked to be in his 50s with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. "You okay?" he called out, his voice cautious but concerned. I tried to answer, but my throat was dry, and the words caught. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to speak. I need help." He eyed me for a moment, his gaze flicking over my disheveled appearance. I must have looked half mad, covered in sweat and dirt, my eyes wide with fear. "You hurt?" I shook my head, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "No, I don't think so. I don't know where I am." The man hesitated, then opened the passenger door. "Get in, I'll take you to town." Relief washed over me and I climbed into the seat, my legs barely able to lift themselves. The warmth of the car's interior was a welcome contrast to the cold night air, but I couldn't relax. My skin still tingled, and the marks on my arms felt like they were burning faintly. As the car started moving, the man glanced at me again. "You been out here long? This road doesn't see much traffic." "I don't know," I admitted. "I woke up in a field. I trailed off, unsure how to explain what had happened. I think I was lost." He nodded slowly, his brow furrowing. "You look like you've been through hell." "You sure you're not hurt?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, though the words felt hollow. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The hum in my body hadn't gone away. If anything, it was getting stronger, a low vibration that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside me. I pressed my hands against my thighs, trying to ignore it, but the man noticed. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again, his tone more insistent this time. I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he turned his attention back to the road, and we drove in silence for a while. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The hum was growing louder, more insistent, and I could feel the marks on my arms pulsing in time with it. My stomach churned, and I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself. And then, just as we rounded a bend in the road, the hum stopped. It was like a switch had been flipped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I glanced down at my arms, and my breath caught in my throat. The marks were glowing again. The man must have noticed the change in my expression because he looked over at me. His eyes widened as he saw the faint blue light emanating from my skin. "What the hell?" he started, but before he could finish, the car shuddered violently and the engine cut out. The headlights flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. "Stay in the car," he said sharply, his voice laced with fear. He reached for the door handle, but I grabbed his arm. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They're here." The silence after the car died was deafening. My heart raced as I clung to the man's arm, trying to stop him from getting out. He stared at me, confusion and fear etched on his face, but I couldn't explain. How could I? Then I felt it again, that hum deep in my bones. It was faint at first, but it grew steadily, like a low-frequency vibration building inside me. The glowing marks on my arms pulsed in rhythm, brighter than before. "What's going on?" the man whispered, his voice barely audible. Before I could answer, a light appeared in the distance. It wasn't the soft, flickering glow of headlights or even the steady beam of a flashlight. This light was different, cold, white, and otherworldly. It hovered above the treetops, moving slowly but deliberately toward us. "They're coming," I muttered, barely aware that I had spoken aloud. The man's breath hitched. "Who? What are you talking about?" I didn't respond. My eyes were locked on the light, my body frozen as the hum inside me intensified. The air around us grew heavier, thicker, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on the car. And then, without warning, the light stopped. It hovered directly above us, bathing the car in a harsh white glow. I could feel its presence, no, their presence, inside my head again. It wasn't as invasive as before, but it was there, probing, waiting. The man fumbled for the door handle again, panic overtaking him. "We have to get out of here." "No," I said sharply, louder this time. "Don't move." But he didn't listen. He shoved the door open and stumbled out, his boots crunching against the gravel. He looked up at the light, shielding his eyes with one hand. "What the hell is this?" I reached for him, trying to pull him back inside, but it was too late. The light shifted, focusing on him, and the hum in my body erupted into a deafening vibration. My vision blurred, and I clutched my head as pain lanced through my skull. And then it happened. The world around me seemed to slow, the edges of everything shimmering like heat waves on asphalt. I felt a surge of energy rise from deep within me, and before I could stop it, it burst out. The marks on my arms flared, their glow spreading across my skin like ripples on water. The man froze, his eyes wide as he stared at me. "What the hell are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I shouted, my voice cracking. The light above us pulsed, almost like it was reacting to me. The hum in the air grew louder, more intense, and I felt another wave of energy building inside me. It was overwhelming, like trying to contain a storm in my chest. Without thinking, I raised my hands, and the energy exploded outward. It wasn't visible, but I could feel it, a force that rippled through the air, pushing against everything around me. The light above us flickered, and the car shook violently, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. The man staggered back, his hands raised defensively. "Stop! Whatever you're doing, stop!" "I'm not doing this," I cried, my voice raw. But the energy wouldn't stop. It kept building, surging through me like a tidal wave with no outlet. My body trembled, and I could feel the heat of the marks on my arms searing into my skin. And then, as suddenly as it started, the light disappeared. The hum stopped. The pressure in the air lifted, and the marks on my arms dimmed, their glow fading until they were barely visible. I collapsed onto the seat, gasping for air, my entire body shaking from the effort. The man stood a few feet away, his face pale, and his eyes wide with terror. He didn't say anything, just stared at me like I was some kind of monster. I don't know what's happening to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a step back, then another, before turning and running into the darkness. I wanted to call after him to explain, but what could I say? I didn't understand any of this either. All I knew was that something inside me had changed. Something I couldn't control. As I sat there, trying to catch my breath, I felt it again, that faint hum, deep and steady. It wasn't as intense as before, but it was still there, a constant reminder that whatever they had done to me, it wasn't over. They were still watching, and somehow I knew they weren't finished with me yet. After the man ran off into the darkness, I sat there alone, trembling, trying to calm the storm inside me. My arms still tingled where the marks glowed moments before, but now they were faint, nearly invisible under the dim moonlight filtering through the trees. The hum in my body had quieted, but it wasn't gone. It felt like a low, distant vibration, always present, always waiting. I couldn't stay in the car. I knew that much. The light, the ship, might have disappeared, but the sense of being watched hadn't. It lingered, pressing on me from every direction, like an unseen pair of eyes boring into my back. Gathering what little strength I had left, I forced myself out of the car. The night air was colder than before, sharp and biting against my skin. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of gravel under my feet, the rustling of leaves in the wind. My instincts screamed at me to move, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this place. I stumbled down the road, my legs weak and unsteady. Every shadow felt alive, every distant rustle sent a spike of panic through my chest. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the light return, or those tall, thin figures stepping out of the darkness. But there was nothing. Just the endless road stretching ahead, and the oppressive silence behind. After what felt like hours, I saw a faint glow in the distance. Another car. Relief flooded me, but it was quickly replaced by caution. The last man had helped me, yes, but he'd also run from me in fear. What if this person did the same, or worse? What if they didn't believe me at all? The car slowed as it approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I stood in the middle of the road, raising my hands in a desperate attempt to signal them. For a moment, I thought they might drive past, but then the vehicle came to a stop a few feet away. The driver rolled down the window cautiously. It was a woman this time, maybe in her late 30s, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You okay?" she asked, her tone wary but not unkind. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. I don't know," I admitted. "I think I need help." She studied me for a moment, her gaze lingering on my face, then my arms. I quickly crossed them over my chest, hiding the marks as best I could. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "I don't know," I said again, my voice shaking. "I don't even know where I am." She sighed and gestured to the passenger seat. "Get in, we'll figure it out." I hesitated, but the thought of being alone again was too much to bear. I climbed into the car, clutching my arms tightly as she started driving. The woman didn't say much at first, and I was grateful for the silence. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened, everything I still didn't understand. The marks on my arms, the visions, the energy that had exploded out of me. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the silence didn't last. "You look like you've been through hell," she said finally, her voice breaking the stillness. "What happened to you?" I didn't know how. to answer. How do you explain the impossible to someone who has no reason to believe you? I settled for a half-truth. I got lost, out in the woods. I don't remember much after that. She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. Those marks on your arms, how'd you get them? My stomach dropped. I don't know, I said quickly, too quickly. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push the issue. Instead, she focused back on the road, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. We drove in silence for a while longer, the hum in my body growing stronger with each passing mile. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. It wasn't just a sensation. It was a presence, something that felt alive and aware. And then I noticed the car slowing down. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on something in the rearview mirror, her expression tense. I turned to look, and my blood ran cold. A light, soft but unmistakable, hovered in the distance, following us. It was far enough away to seem harmless, but I knew better. I could feel it, even through the glass and steel of the car. "They've been following me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The woman glanced at me, her face pale. "Who?" Before I could answer, the light surged closer, illuminating the interior of the car. The hum in my body erupted, and I doubled over, clutching my stomach as the marks on my arms flared to life. "Oh my God," the woman breathed, staring at me in horror. "What the hell is happening to you?" "I don't know," I cried, the energy inside me building once again. The car sputtered, the engine cutting out as the light grew brighter. We were trapped, and I knew there was no escape this time. They had found me. The light grew brighter, consuming everything around us until the car interior felt as if it were bathed in raw energy. The woman beside me was yelling, her words barely audible over the vibrating hum that filled the air. I clutched my arms, the glowing marks burning against my skin, and all I could think was, "It's happening again." The car jolted suddenly, as though something had struck it from above. The woman grabbed the wheel, trying to steady us, but the engine was dead, and the vehicle began to slow to a stop. The hum outside merged with the one inside me, creating an unbearable resonance that felt like it would shatter me from the inside out. I could feel them. They weren't just in the sky, they were here, close. Their presence pressing down like a weight I couldn't escape. "I told you they're following me," I said, my voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. Her wide eyes were fixed on the light above, her face pale and drenched in sweat. "Who are they? What do they want?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. They weren't just watching anymore. Before I could respond, the world around us seemed to shift. It wasn't like the abrupt abductions I'd experienced before. This was slower, deliberate, like being pulled into a current you couldn't see. The trees on either side of the road seemed to blur and stretch, their forms melting into the brightness, and then it stopped. Everything went dark. For a moment, I thought I was unconscious again, but then I felt the cold, hard surface beneath me. My eyes adjusted to the dim bluish light, and I realized I wasn't in the car anymore. I was back in that place, the ship. The woman was there too, lying a few feet away from me. She stirred, groaning softly as she tried to sit up. Where are we?" she asked, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. My focus was on the walls around us. They were smooth and metallic, pulsing faintly with that same eerie light I'd seen before. The symbols were back too, etched into every surface, glowing softly like veins carrying some unknown energy. As I stared at them, something clicked in my mind. The symbols weren't just decoration, they were a language, a code. I didn't understand it fully, but it was familiar, like a word you recognize but can't quite place. "They're not random," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "What?" she asked, her voice sharp with panic. "The symbols, they mean something." I traced one with my finger, feeling a faint vibration beneath the surface. "They're part of a pattern." She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about? What pattern?" I didn't know how to explain it to her, or even to myself. But as I looked around the room, the connections became clearer. The symbols on the walls matched the patterns I'd seen in my visions. The same shapes, the same geometric precision. It was all connected. This wasn't just a ship. It was something more. A control center, a hub. I didn't know, but I could feel its purpose thrumming through the air, through my body. They've been here a long time, I said quietly, the realization dawning on me. They've been guiding us, humanity, for centuries, maybe longer. The woman shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's insane. How could you possibly know that? Because they showed me, I replied. I've seen it. Wars, disasters, revolutions. They've been pulling the strings the IC whole time. It's all part of their plan. She looked like she was about to argue, but before she could speak, the air around us shifted. The hum returned, louder and more intense than ever. The light above us grew brighter, and I felt that familiar pressure in my mind. It was them again, pushing into my thoughts, searching for something. And then the visions came. They weren't like before. These weren't random flashes of destruction or chaos. They were focused, deliberate, showing me pieces of a larger puzzle. Cities crumbling, oceans rising, people fleeing in terror. And always in the background, those tall, thin figures watching silently. But this time, there was something new. A face. My face. I was standing amidst the chaos, holding that glowing object I'd seen before. It pulsed with energy, its light cutting through the darkness, and I could feel its importance radiating through the vision. The message was clear. Whatever was happening, I wasn't just a bystander. I was part of it now. When the vision ended, I was back in the ship, gasping for air. The woman was staring at me, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think they've been planning this for a long time." The ship grew eerily silent after the vision faded. That hum, the constant, suffocating hum, had quieted to an almost imperceptible buzz. But even in the silence I could feel their presence. They weren't in the room with us, at least not physically, but they were there, somewhere, observing, waiting. The woman was pacing now, her movements sharp and frantic. "This can't be real," she muttered over and over, her voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be real." "It is," I said, my voice hollow. I wanted to reassure her, but how could I? I could barely keep myself together. My own mind felt fractured, splintered by everything I had seen and felt. "They're in my head," I continued, almost to myself. "Even when they're not here, they're in my head." She stopped pacing and stared at me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean? What are they doing to us?" I hesitated, trying to put the feeling into words. "It's like they're leaving pieces of themselves behind, like breadcrumbs. I can feel them, even when they're not around." I looked down at the faint marks on my arms. "They didn't just take us. They changed us." The woman shook her head, backing away from me as if I were the threat. No, you're wrong. They're not in me. This is just some kind of nightmare, or hallucination, or..." Before she could finish, the hum returned, louder this time. The lights in the room began to pulse, flickering in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow brighter, their intricate patterns shifting ever so slightly like they were alive. And then I heard it, a voice. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. There was no sound, no vibration in the air, but it was inside me, clear and unmistakable, resonating in the deepest parts of my mind. "You were warned." I froze, the words reverberating through me. They weren't just words. They carried a weight, an emotion that felt like both a command and a threat. The woman must have felt it too, because she clutched her head, her face contorted in pain. What is that?" she gasped. Before I could answer, the voice came again, stronger this time. "Do not interfere. The lights in the room flickered faster, casting sharp, shifting shadows across the walls. The hum grew so loud it felt like it was vibrating my bones, and I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears even though I knew it wouldn't help. Images flooded my mind again, but they were different from before. These weren't visions of the future. They were warnings, reminders of what had happened to others who had defied them. I saw flashes of people, men, women, children, all with the same glowing marks on their bodies. They were screaming, running, hiding, but it didn't matter. The figures always found them. The lights always came. And then the images shifted to destruction. Entire cities reduced to rubble, their inhabitants wiped out in an instant. Fires raging across forests, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Oceans swallowing entire coastlines as if the planet itself were retaliating against its inhabitants. This is not your fight. The voice was deafening now, consuming every thought, every sensation. I felt like my mind was being torn apart, like they were stripping me down to my very core. But beneath the pain, I felt something else. A spark, a tiny ember of defiance. "No," I whispered, barely audible over the cacophony in my head. The hum faltered for a moment, as if they were surprised. "This is my fight," I said, louder this time. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to keep going. "You did this to me. You made me part of this." The lights in the room flared, blindingly bright, and the pressure in my mind intensified. I felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss, teetering between defiance and total submission. But then, just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The lights dimmed, the hum faded, and the room was silent once more. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my body shaking uncontrollably. The woman rushed to my side, her hands trembling as she helped me sit up. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're trying to scare us," I said, my voice hoarse. "They think they can control us, but we have something they don't." She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I looked down at the faint glow of the marks on my arms. "They gave us this. Whatever it is, it's part of their plan. But it's also our way out." The woman stared at me, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "You're crazy," she said. "You're going to get us killed." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I'm not going to let them win." The room around us began to shift again, the walls shimmering as the symbols pulsed faintly. I didn't know what was coming next, but one thing was certain. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The walls shimmered faintly as the hum receded to a low, almost imperceptible vibration. I was bracing myself for the next wave, for more visions, more pain, but nothing came. For the first time since this nightmare began, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It felt deliberate, like they were waiting for us to make a move. The woman stood a few feet away, pacing again, her face pale and her hands trembling. She kept muttering to herself, broken phrases like, "This isn't real," and "I shouldn't be here." I understood her panic. It was the same panic that had gripped me when I first realized they had taken me. But now, there was something else stirring inside me, a faint, growing sense of purpose. "We need to figure out what this is," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded foreign to me, hoarse, tired, but resolute. She stopped pacing and turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Figure out what? What are you even talking about?" "The marks," I said, holding up my arms. The faint lines glimmered softly in the dim light, pulsing like a second heartbeat. "They left these for a reason. They didn't just do this to torture us. There's a purpose to it." "A purpose?" she snapped, her voice rising. "Are you kidding me? They kidnapped us, experimented on us, and now you think they're doing us a favor?" I shook my head. "I didn't say it's a favor. I'm saying it's a tool. Maybe they didn't mean for us to use it, but we can. We have to." She stared at me like I'd lost my mind, and honestly, I didn't blame her. A week ago, or maybe even a few hours ago, I wouldn't have believed any of this either. Before she could respond, the air around us shifted. It wasn't the oppressive weight I'd felt earlier. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable. But I felt it, like a ripple moving through the room. And then he stepped out of the shadows. At first, I thought it was one of them. The tall, thin figures with their smooth, featureless faces and unblinking eyes. But as the figure came into view, I realized it wasn't. He was human. Or at least, he looked human. He was tall, with short, dark hair and sharp features that seemed oddly familiar. He wore a simple black jumpsuit, and his movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were trying not to startle us. "Who are you?" the woman demanded, her voice laced with both fear and anger. He raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice calm and even. "I'm here to help." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief dripping from the word. "Who are you? How did you get here?" "My name is Elias," he said, "and I've been here a long time." The woman and I exchanged a glance. She looked just as confused and wary as I felt. "What does that mean?" I asked. Elias sighed, his gaze shifting to the walls, where the glowing symbols continued their faint pulse. "It means I know what they're doing to you, because they did it. To me, too." My stomach dropped. "You were taken?" He nodded. "Years ago. Decades, maybe. Time doesn't work the same way here." The woman crossed her arms, her skepticism clear. "If that's true, how are you still here? Why haven't they done whatever it is they do to people like us?" Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because I learned how to survive. I learned how to use what they gave me." I felt a chill run down my spine. "The marks," I said. He nodded again. "They're not just marks. They're conduits. They connect you to them, to their technology, their network. That's how they control us, but it's also how we can fight back." The woman shook, her head backing away. No, this is insane. You're insane." Elias didn't react to her outburst. His eyes stayed locked on mine. "You felt it, haven't you? The energy, the way it builds inside you. You've already started to tap into it, even if you don't understand how." I swallowed hard, my mind flashing back to the car, to the way the energy had exploded out of me. "I don't know how to control it," I admitted. "It just happens." "You can learn," he said, "but you have to be careful. If they realize what you're doing, they'll stop you. Permanently." The woman let out a bitter laugh. "Great. So we're either their lab rats or their enemies. Fantastic." Elias stepped closer, his expression serious. "You don't have to trust me. But if you want to survive, you'll listen to me." I hesitated, glancing at the woman. She looked like she was on the verge of breaking, her hands shaking as she hugged herself tightly. But I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. "What do we do?" I asked. Elias's gaze hardened. "We fight back." If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more spine-chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is pinned in the first comment, and even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Elias's words hung in the air like a challenge. We fight back. I didn't know how to respond at first. The weight of everything, the abductions, the experiments, the marks on my body, and now this stranger telling me there was some kind of war to fight, was crushing. But deep down, I knew he was right. The woman, however, wasn't having it. "You're insane," she said, her voice rising. "Fight back? Against them? You've seen what they can do. They can read our minds. They can paralyze us. They're controlling us. How do you fight something like that?" Elias stayed calm, though his eyes darkened slightly. "I never said it would be easy, but it's possible. I've been doing it for years." "Years?" I asked, the doubt clear in my voice. "How have you survived this long? They don't exactly seem like they're big on letting people go." "They're not," Elias admitted, "but I've learned how to stay hidden, how to block them out." "Block them out?" I echoed, my curiosity piqued. He nodded, stepping closer to me. The marks on your body, they're not just for control. They're receivers. They let you tap into their network, their technology. That's how they monitor you. But with the right training, you can use them to your advantage. I glanced down at the faint lines on my arms. The thought of using them, of turning their tools against them, felt impossible. But I had felt the energy he was talking about. The surge that had erupted from me in the car. Was that part of it? Elias must have seen the doubt in my eyes because he knelt down in front of me, his tone softening. I know this is overwhelming. I know how it feels to be in your position, to feel like you've lost control of your own body, your own mind, but I promise you there's a way out. The woman let out a bitter laugh, pacing again. This is insane. Absolutely insane. Even if you're telling the truth, even if we can fight back, what's the point? They're everywhere. They're watching us right now. Then let them watch, Elias said, standing up and facing her. Let them see what happens when we stop being afraid. His conviction was unnerving, but it was also contagious. I could feel something stirring inside me, an ember of defiance that had been smoldering since the first time they took me. How does it work? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. Elias turned back to me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It starts with your mind. They control you by overwhelming your thoughts, by making you feel powerless. But the truth is, they can't take anything from you unless you let them. That's easy for you to say, the woman snapped. You've had years to figure this out. We don't have that kind of time. You don't need years, Elias said firmly. You just need to focus, to stop fighting against the marks and start working with them. I frowned, unsure of what he meant. What does that even look like? Close your eyes, he said. I hesitated, glancing at the woman. She looked like she was ready to bolt, but I stayed where I was. Slowly, I closed my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. Focus on the marks, Elias instructed. Feel the energy inside you. It's already there. You just have to let it flow. At first, I felt nothing, just the dull ache of exhaustion and the lingering buzz of fear in my mind. But as I concentrated, something began to shift. It started as a faint warmth in my arms, spreading slowly through my body. That's it, Elias said, his voice calm and steady. Don't fight it. Let it build. The warmth grew stronger, turning into a pulsing heat that radiated from the marks. My breath quickened as the sensation intensified, and for a moment, I thought I might lose control again. Stay with it, Elias said. You're in control. It's your energy. It belongs to you. I clenched my fists, focusing on his words. The heat reached its peak, and then it leveled out. The chaos inside me subsided, replaced by a steady rhythmic pulse that felt like it was coming from deep within my core. I opened my eyes, and Elias smiled. You felt it, didn't you? I nodded, too stunned to speak. What just happened? The woman asked, her voice trembling. She's starting to take control, Elias said. That's the first step. The woman shook her head, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. This is too much. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. Yes, you are, Elias said firmly. We all are. That's what they're afraid of, that we'll figure out how strong we really are. I looked down at the marks on my arms, the faint glow still pulsing softly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ship and the steady pulsing of the marks on my arms. The warmth I'd felt moments ago was still there, faint but undeniable, like a fire just beginning to catch. Elias watched me closely, his expression calm but intense, as if he could see something in me I couldn't yet recognize. The woman, however, wasn't convinced. She shook her head, her hands gripping her hair as she paced back and forth. Hope? She scoffed, echoing the word I hadn't spoken aloud. Hope won't stop them from tearing us apart. Hope won't save us when they come back. I turned to her, my voice steadier than I expected. You felt it too, didn't you? The marks, they're not just for control. There's something else. She stopped pacing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. What I felt was fear. Pain. That's all they've given us. Elias stepped forward, his voice firm but gentle. Fear is what they use to keep you in line. But pain is a doorway. It's how you learn, how you grow. They've engineered this entire system to make you think you're powerless. But the truth is, they've given you the tools to fight back. She stared at him, her eyes full of doubt and anger. Why? Why would they give us the tools to fight them? That makes no sense. Elias hesitated, his gaze dropping for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost hesitant. Because they're not perfect. They're not gods, no matter how much they want us to believe they are. They're intelligent, yes, far beyond anything we can comprehend. But they're not infallible. They make mistakes, and when they do... He gestured to the marks on my arms. We're the result. I felt a chill run through me at his words. You're saying, we're accidents? Experiments gone wrong? Not wrong, Elias corrected. Different. They've been doing this for centuries, studying us, manipulating us, shaping us. Most people don't survive the process. But the ones who do, he trailed off, his eyes meeting mine. The ones who survive are changed. They become something new. The weight of his words settled over me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought about the visions, the energy that had surged through me, the way the marks pulsed, in time with the hum of the ship. I thought about the images I'd seen, the destruction, the chaos, the strange object I'd held in my hands. What are they trying to do? I asked finally. What's the end game? Elias's expression darkened. I don't know for sure, but I've seen enough to know it's not just about us. It's about control. They don't just want to study humanity. They want to shape it, to mold us into something that fits their plan. And what if we don't fit? The woman asked, her voice trembling. Elias's silence was answer enough. I felt a wave of nausea as the implications sank in. They weren't just experimenting on us. They were rewriting us, rewriting humanity. And those who didn't fit their vision, I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the faint warmth in my arms. You said we can fight back. How? Elias studied me for a moment before answering. It starts with understanding what they've given you. The marks on your body, they're not just physical. They're a connection to their network, their technology. It's how they control you, but it's also how you can disrupt them. Disrupt them? The woman said, her voice rising. You make it sound so easy, like we can just flip a switch and make them go away. It's not easy, Elias said. It takes focus, discipline, and time. But it's possible. I've done it before. Her eyes narrowed. If you've done it, why are you still here? Why haven't you escaped? Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. Because it's not just about escaping. It's about stopping them. If I leave, they'll keep going. They'll keep taking people, keep experimenting, keep destroying. Someone has to stand up to them. And you think that someone is us? I asked, my voice quieter now. He nodded. You've already taken the first step. You've felt the energy, the connection. You've started to understand what you're capable of. That's more than most people ever get. The woman let out a bitter laugh. Great. So we're supposed to be your soldiers in some kind of war we didn't even sign up for? It's not a war, Elias said. It's survival. And whether you like it or not, you're already part of it. I looked down at my arms again, at the faint glow of the marks. They felt like a burden, a curse I hadn't asked for, but they also felt like something more, like a key, waiting to unlock a door I couldn't yet see. What do we do next? I asked. Elias smiled faintly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. We learn, and then we fight. As Elias's words echoed in my mind, we learn, and then we fight. I felt the weight of everything begin to crush me. My body was trembling, my head pounding, and my thoughts were spiraling out of control. The marks on my arms tingled faintly, a constant reminder of the connection I couldn't escape. The woman was still pacing, muttering to herself, her hands shaking. Elias was calm, composed, but there was a tension in his expression that told me he knew this wasn't going to be easy. For me, though, it was becoming unbearable. My breathing grew shallow, my vision narrowing as panic clawed its way up my chest. The walls around me, the glowing, shifting walls of this alien space, felt like they were closing in, pressing against me. I can't. The words slipped out of me before I even realized I'd spoken. I can't do this. Elias turned to me, his brow furrowing. Yes, you can. You've already started. You're stronger than you think. But his reassurance felt hollow. My thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and doubt, each one louder than the last. They're watching us. They're inside me. I'll never be free. I'll never get out of this. They'll come for us again. They'll come for me. I can't, I shouted, my voice cracking. I staggered back, clutching my head as the hum in my body grew louder, sharper. I don't know how to do this. I don't even know what they want from me. Elias stepped closer, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Breathe, he said softly. Focus on your breath. You're letting the fear take over. You have to take control. But I couldn't. I couldn't focus on anything but the overwhelming pressure in my chest, the sensation that I was being torn apart from the inside out. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The woman stopped pacing, her face pale as she watched me. This is what they want, she said quietly, her voice trembling. They want us broken. They want us to lose our minds. She's not broken, Elias said firmly, kneeling beside me. She's overwhelmed, but she's not broken. I barely heard them. The hum was deafening now, drowning out their voices, their presence. It wasn't just in my body anymore. It was in my mind, like 1,000 static-filled frequencies colliding at once. And then the visions came again. This time, they were more chaotic, more fragmented. I saw flashes of the ship, of the alien beings with their unblinking eyes and spindly limbs. I saw the Earth from above, spinning in the void of space, its surface marred by storms and destruction. I saw myself, standing in a place I didn't recognize, holding the glowing object from before. It pulsed in my hands, radiating energy, but I didn't know what to do with it. Around me, people screamed and ran, their faces twisted in terror. And then I saw them. Hundreds of the beings, descending from the sky like shadows, their presence overwhelming, suffocating. The images were relentless, hammering into my mind with no pause, no reprieve. I felt like I was drowning in them, unable to surface, unable to breathe. Stop, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Please stop. But the visions didn't stop. If anything, they became more intense, more vivid. I could feel the heat of the destruction, hear the screams of the people. I could feel the weight of the object in my hands, its energy burning into my skin. And then, amidst the chaos, a single word echoed in my mind. Decide. The word was sharp, clear, cutting through the noise like a knife. It wasn't a command. It was a choice. Decide. My breathing slowed as the word repeated, quieter. This time, almost gentle. The visions began to fade, the chaos receding like a tide. The hum in my body softened, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could think. Elias's voice broke through the haze. That's it. You're still here. You're still in control. I opened my eyes, blinking against the dim light. The room came back into focus. The walls, the symbols. Elias kneeling beside me, the woman standing a few feet away. I was still trembling, but the worst of it had passed. What happened to me? I asked, my voice hoarse. They pushed you, Elias said. They wanted to see if you'd break. And if I had? He didn't answer, but his expression said enough. The woman spoke up, her voice shaking. This is what I'm talking about. They're inside us. They'll keep doing this until there's nothing left of us. No, Elias said firmly. They want you to think that. They want you to believe you're powerless. But you're not. I looked down at my arms, at the faint glow of the marks. The warmth was still there, steady and reassuring. For the first time I realized what it was. A lifeline. A tether to something greater. They're afraid of us, I said softly, the words surprising even me. Elias nodded. They are, because they know what we're capable of, even if we don't. I took a deep breath, the weight in my chest beginning to lift. I wasn't broken, not yet, and as long as I had that spark, that connection, I wasn't going to let them win. The room felt heavier after my collapse, like the air itself was saturated with the weight of what just happened. I sat there on the cold metallic floor, still trembling, my hands shaking as I stared down at the marks on my arms. They had dimmed again, but the faint pulse was still there, steady, as if reminding me that I was tethered to something I didn't fully understand. Elias crouched next to me, his expression calm but serious. You're stronger than they want you to believe, he said, his voice low. But now you have to decide what you're going to do with that strength. I didn't respond right away. My mind was still raw from the visions, my body aching from the energy that had coursed through me. I couldn't forget that voice, sharp and deliberate, echoing in my head. Decide. The woman paced nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her panic had subsided slightly, but her eyes darted around the room, and she jumped every time. The faint hum shifted, or the walls flickered. She didn't trust any of this. She didn't trust Elias, and I wasn't even sure she trusted me. What happens if we fight back? I asked finally, my voice hoarse. Elias sat back on his heels, exhaling slowly. If we fight, we disrupt their plan. We make them lose control. That's what they're afraid of, that we'll realize we have power, that we can turn their own tools against them. And what if they come after us? The woman snapped, her voice sharp. What if they decide we're not worth the trouble? And just wipe us out? Elias's expression darkened. That's always a risk. But do you really think they'll stop if we do nothing? They'll keep taking people. They'll keep experimenting. They'll keep twisting humanity into whatever shape fits their design. The only way to survive is to resist. The woman stopped pacing, glaring at him. Easy for you to say. You've been here for years. You've had time to figure all this out. But what about us? We don't even know what we're doing. You'll learn, Elias said simply. The energy inside you, it's already starting to wake up. The more you use it, the more you'll understand how it works. She laughed bitterly. And what happens when they notice? When they decide we've gone too far? They've already noticed, I said quietly, surprising myself. Both of them turned to look at me, and I forced myself to sit up straighter, even though my body still felt weak. They know what we're capable of. That's why they're testing us. They're trying to see if we'll break before we figure it out. Elias nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Exactly. The woman shook her head, her hands trembling. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't. I didn't ask for this. I just want to go home. So do I said, my voice firm. But do you really think we'll ever get back to the lives we had before? Do you think they'll just let us walk away? She didn't answer, but the look on her face said everything. She knew the truth, even if she didn't want to admit it. I turned back to Elias. If we fight back, how do we start? His expression hardened, his tone steady. First, you have to learn to control the energy inside you. It's the key to everything. It's how they communicate, how they manipulate, how they connect to their technology. Once you understand how to use it, you can block them out, and you can disrupt their systems. And then what? I asked. Then we find the others, Elias said. I blinked, caught off guard. Others? He nodded. You're not the only ones they've taken. There are others like you, like us. Some of them are still out there, hiding, trying to survive. If we can bring them together, we'll have a chance. Alone, we're vulnerable. But together... He trailed off, his eyes glinting with determination. Together we can make them afraid. The idea of others, of more people like me, was both terrifying and comforting. I wasn't alone in this, but that also meant there were more people who had suffered, more people who were being hunted. The woman's voice cut through my thoughts. And what if we can't find them? What if it's just us? Then we fight with what we have, Elias said simply. It doesn't matter how small the resistance is. What matters is that we don't give up. I looked down at the marks on my arms, at the faint glow that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. The fire inside me, the energy, was still there, waiting. For the first time, I felt like I could reach for it without fear. Decide. The voice echoed in my mind again, quieter this time, like a whisper carried on the wind. I'm in, I said finally, my voice steady. Elias smiled, a glimmer of hope in his expression. The woman didn't say anything, but she didn't argue either. The walls around us flickered, the symbols glowing faintly as the hum shifted. The air felt heavier again, and I knew they were still watching, still waiting. But for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. Just as I began to feel the faintest flicker of control, the ship responded. The humming walls around us pulsed violently, as though the entire structure had come alive, reacting to our defiance. The symbols glowed brighter, their light seeping into the room, casting shifting alien patterns on the floor. Elias's face darkened. He stood abruptly, his posture tense, his eyes scanning the room. They know, he said grimly. They know you've made your decision. I felt the air grow heavier again, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through my bones. The marks on my arms flared to life, glowing brighter than ever before. The heat from them was almost unbearable, as if my skin was on the verge of burning. They're coming, I whispered, the words barely audible over the growing hum. The woman backed away, her hands trembling as she clutched her arms. No, this isn't happening again. I'm not going back to them. Elias moved toward her, his voice calm but firm. They're not taking you. Not this time. Before he could say more, the room shifted violently, the walls seeming to ripple like water. A bright light burst from above, blindingly white and all-consuming. I felt myself being lifted off the ground, the same way I had been before. The same, yet different. This time I wasn't just a helpless passenger. I could feel the connection, the energy surging through me, and I knew I could fight it. But I didn't know how. Focus! Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Don't fight the energy, use it. You're stronger than they are. I tried to focus, tried to channel the fire burning inside me, but the light was too strong, the pull too overwhelming. My body was frozen, suspended in midair, as the ship dragged me upward. I could hear the woman screaming, her voice distant and distorted, but I couldn't see her anymore. And then everything went white. When the light faded, I was back in the examination room. The cold metallic surface beneath me felt all too familiar, and the faint sterile smell of the air brought back a flood of memories I wanted to forget. But this time, something was different. I wasn't paralyzed. I could move. I sat up slowly, my body still trembling, and looked around the room. The alien figures were there, their tall, thin forms silhouetted against the glowing walls. They were watching me, their black, featureless eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. The hum in my body was back, louder and more insistent than ever. The marks on my arms glowed brightly, their light pulsing in time with the symbols on the walls. I could feel the energy coursing through me, wild and untamed, like a storm trapped inside my skin. They stepped closer, their movements fluid and deliberate. One of them raised a long, spindly arm, holding a device I didn't recognize. It emitted a faint bluish light that seemed to ripple through the air, and I felt the pressure in my mind intensify. No, I said, my voice shaking but determined. You're not going to control me. The being tilted its head slightly, as if curious, but it didn't stop. The pressure in my mind grew stronger, sharper, and I could feel them digging into my thoughts, searching for something. And then I remembered Elias's words. The energy belongs to you. Use it. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the pain, the fear, the overwhelming presence of the beings around me. I focused on the marks on my arms, on the heat radiating from them, on the pulsing rhythm that matched my heartbeat. At first, nothing happened. The pressure in my mind grew unbearable, and I thought I might break. But then, slowly, the energy began to respond. It started as a faint spark, a flicker of warmth that grew stronger with each passing second. I could feel it spreading through my body, igniting every nerve, every cell, until I was filled with a blinding, searing light. The pressure in my mind faltered, and I opened my eyes. The beings had stepped back, their heads tilted as if in confusion. The device in their hands flickered, its bluish light sputtering and dimming. I didn't stop. I let the energy build, let it flow through me until it felt like I might explode. The marks on my arms burned brightly, their light filling the room, overpowering the symbols on the walls. The beings moved quickly now, their movements sharp and erratic, as if they didn't know how to handle what was happening. The device in their hands fell to the floor, shattering into pieces. For the first time, I saw something in them I never thought possible. Fear. The energy inside me reached its peak, and with a single desperate scream, I released it. The room, filled with light, blinding and all-encompassing, and I felt the being's presence fade, their control shattering like glass. When the light finally dimmed, I was alone. The room was empty, the beings gone, the symbols on the walls dark. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling from the effort. The marks on my arms had dimmed, their glow faint but still present, like embers after a fire. I didn't know where Elias or the woman were, or if they had survived, but I knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to take me again, not without a fight. I don't remember how I got out of the ship. One moment, I was crumpled on the cold metallic floor, my body exhausted and my mind barely holding on. The next, I was lying in the middle of a dirt road, staring up at the night sky. The stars looked so normal. The kind of stars you see on a clear night, scattered across the black canvas above, indifferent to everything happening below. But I wasn't the same. I knew that. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. The marks on my arms were still there, faintly glowing like dying embers. The hum in my body had quieted, but it was still present, a subtle reminder that I was connected to something much larger than myself. I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. My clothes were torn and filthy, and my skin was covered in cuts and bruises, but I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I was alive. The road was empty, stretching into the darkness in both directions. There was no sign of Elias or the woman, no indication of where they might have gone, or if they had even made it out. I called out for them, my voice hoarse and weak, but the only response was the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. For a moment, I thought about staying there, about lying back down and letting the darkness swallow me. But then the memories came flooding back, the visions, the voices, the overwhelming sense of purpose that had been burned into my mind. I couldn't stop now. I forced myself to my feet, swaying unsteadily as I took my first steps. My legs felt like jelly, and every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my body, but I kept going. The first signs of civilization appeared just as the sky began to lighten, the faint glow of dawn creeping over the horizon. A gas station stood at the edge of the road, its neon sign flickering weakly. It looked abandoned, but I didn't care. I needed water. I needed answers. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. The shelves were mostly bare, but I found a bottle of water near the counter and drank it in one desperate gulp. As I leaned against the counter, catching my breath, I noticed a small TV mounted on the wall. It was old, the kind with dials and rabbit ears, and the screen flickered with static. But then, for a brief moment, the static cleared, and an image appeared. It was the Earth, seen from space. But it wasn't the Earth I knew. The colors were wrong, too dark, too muted, and there were strange geometric patterns etched into the surface, glowing faintly like the marks on my arms. A voice crackled through the speakers. faint and distorted. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was cold, mechanical, and unmistakably alien. The screen flickered again, and the image was gone, replaced by static once more. I backed, away from the TV, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. The visions, the marks, the energy inside me. It was all connected to something far bigger than I could comprehend. And then I felt it again. That presence. That unmistakable feeling of being watched. I turned, scanning the empty gas station, but there was no one there. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation. It wasn't just paranoia, it was real. They were still watching. I grabbed another bottle of water and stumbled back outside, the cool morning air hitting my face like a slap. I had to keep moving. I didn't know where I was going, but staying in one place felt like an invitation for them to come back. As I walked down the road, the faint hum in my body began to grow stronger. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't free. Not yet. But I also felt something else. The ember of defiance that Elias had spoken about. The spark that had kept me alive in that ship was still there. It was small, fragile, but it was mine. And I wasn't going to let them take it away. I thought about the glowing object from my visions, the one I had held in my hands. I didn't know what it was or what it meant, but I knew it was important. It was the key to something they wanted, something they feared. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them win. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty road, I kept walking. The world felt different now. Heavier, quieter, like it was holding its breath. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't alone. There were others out there, others like me, and I was going to find them. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.